I never knew how close I came to not existing. Mom told me years later that when she found out she was pregnant with me, she wasn't sure they could afford a kid. Dad wasn't making much, and they were barely scraping by. But then my dad's parents, my grandparents, found out about the pregnancy. Not only were they thrilled, but they went above and beyond. They gave Mom and Dad their house, a nice place in a good neighborhood, close to a great school. They even promised to help out with money. I was born into that house, and for the first few years, life was pretty good. Grandma and Grandpa were always around, picking me up, taking care of me when Mom was working. They'd take me to the park, read me stories, and sneak me treats when Mom wasn't looking. When I started school at 5, they'd pick me up every day. We'd go for ice cream or to the playground. Those were some of the happiest times of my life. But then, everything changed. I remember that night clearly. I was supposed to be asleep, but the yelling woke me up. Mom and Dad were having a huge fight. I couldn't make out everything they were saying, but I heard words like betrayal and how could you? Then I heard the front door slam. I peeked out my window and saw Dad stumbling to his car. He was holding a bottle. I later learned it was whiskey. I watched him drive off, tires screeching. That was the last time I saw my dad alive. The next morning, 2 police officers came to our door. Mom collapsed when they told her Dad had been in an accident. He'd lost control of the car and driven off the road. He didn't make it. The funeral was a blur. I remember holding Mom's hand, confused about why Dad was in a box and why everyone was crying. Grandma and Grandpa were there, hugging me tightly, their faces streaked with tears. But after the funeral, things changed rapidly. Mom seemed to bounce back quickly, too quickly. Within months, she had a new man in her life. Before I knew it, they were married, and Mom was pregnant again. "You're going to have a little sister, Carol," Mom told me, her eyes shining. "Isn't that exciting?" I nodded, not sure how to feel. Everything was changing so fast, and I missed Dad. I missed Grandma and Grandpa too. They stopped coming around, and I didn't understand why. "Mom, why don't Grandma and Grandpa visit anymore?" I asked one day. Mom's face hardened. "They don't want anything to do with us anymore, Carol. They abandoned us because I've started a new family." Then her face softened. "At least they left us the house and helped with the money for your education. That's something to be thankful for." My little sister arrived a few months after Mom remarried. I remember Mom saying she was born prematurely, but even at my young age, something felt off about that explanation. Still, I was too preoccupied with the sudden changes in my life to question it much. My new stepfather, Frank, worked as a driver. Mom kept her job as a salesperson. We weren't rich by any means, but we always had enough for the essentials. At least, that's what I was told. From the start, it was clear that Frank didn't like me much. He'd glare at me across the dinner table, his jaw clenching whenever I spoke. "Can't you keep that kid quiet?" he'd snap at Mom. "I'm trying to eat in peace here." Mom would rush to placate him. "Carol, honey, why don't you go to your room? I'll bring you your dinner later." As time went on, these moments became more frequent. Frank's temper was short, and everything seemed to set him off, especially me. He'd call me names when Mom wasn't around, his face twisted in disgust. "You're nothing but a freeloader," he'd spit. "A burden. You know that, right?" I'd nod silently, fighting back tears. What else could I do? The contrast between how Frank treated me and my sister was stark. With her, he was all smiles and affection. He'd bounce her on his knee, shower her with gifts, and speak to her in a sickeningly sweet voice that made my stomach turn. "There's my little angel," he'd coo. "Daddy's got a surprise for you." Mom, desperate to keep Frank happy, started finding ways to keep me out of sight. She'd usher me to my room whenever Frank came home, locking the door behind me. I'd sit there for hours, listening to the sounds of a happy family on the other side, laughter, conversation, the clink of cutlery on plates. I didn't understand why I had to eat alone in my room, why I couldn't move freely in my own home, why I was treated like an unwelcome guest. As I grew older, the isolation intensified. Family holidays? I wasn't invited. Trips to visit Frank's friends and relatives? I was left behind. Even when people came to our house, I was told to stay in my room and keep quiet. "We don't want to upset Frank," Mom would say, her eyes pleading. "You know how he gets." And I did know. I'd seen his rages, heard the crashes and bangs when something set him off. So I stayed quiet. I stayed out of the way. I became a ghost in my own home. The only times I felt any semblance of normalcy were the rare occasions when Mom would take me shopping or run errands with her. But even then, there was no room for fun or freedom. It was all business, quick and efficient, always with an eye on the clock. "We can't be too long," Mom would say, checking her watch nervously. "Frank will be home soon." As the years passed, I retreated further into myself. I became shy, withdrawn. At school, I barely spoke to anyone. But in the privacy of my room, in the worlds I created in my mind, I found an escape. I'd make up stories, grand adventures where I was the hero, where I was wanted and loved. When I turned 16, my life took an unexpected turn. Spending most of my time alone in my room, I'd become pretty good at using the internet to escape my reality. One day, I stumbled upon an online publishing house that was looking for fresh voices in children's and young adult literature. On a whim, I submitted some of my stories. To my shock, they loved them. Before I knew it, I was working with them regularly, writing stories and helping develop educational apps for kids and teens. For the first time in years, I felt proud of myself. My ideas were popular, my stories were being published, and best of all, I was earning my own money. I saved every penny I could, watching my bank account grow with a sense of excitement I'd never felt before. One day, feeling particularly bold after a big payment came through, I decided to share my success with Mom. We were alone in the kitchen, Frank was out on a long-haul drive, and my sister was at a friend's house. "Mom," I said, my voice shaking a little, "I've got something to tell you. I've been working for this publishing house, writing stories and stuff. And, well, I'm making pretty good money." Mom's eyes widened. "Really? Oh, Carol, that's wonderful. I always knew you were a smart girl." Her praise, so rare these days, made me glow. But then her expression changed, becoming calculating. "You know," she said, leaning in close, "this is perfect timing. We've been having some financial troubles lately." My heart sank. I should have known better than to hope for simple pride or happiness. "The thing is," Mom continued, "this house is so big, and the upkeep is expensive. And well, raising you hasn't been cheap either. We've been exhausted trying to provide for you all these years." I felt like I'd been slapped. Hadn't I been the one locked away, barely even part of the family? How had I been such a burden? "Remember that college fund we set aside for you?" Mom said, not meeting my eyes. "Well, we had to use that money. For the house, you know. But now that you're earning your own money, you can support yourself, right?" I nodded numbly, not trusting myself to speak. "That's my girl," Mom said, patting my hand. "Oh, and one more thing. Frank and I have been talking, and we think it's best if you move out after you graduate. We're planning to renovate your room for your sister. She needs more space, you understand." I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. "Move out? But, where will I go?" Mom shrugged, already turning away. "You're a smart girl, Carol. I'm sure you'll figure it out. You've got some savings now, right?" As she walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone, the full weight of her words hit me. I was being kicked out. The money I thought would be my ticket to college was gone. And my own mother didn't seem to care where I ended up. The months leading up to graduation were a blur of anxiety and desperate planning. I threw myself into my schoolwork during the day, determined to at least finish high school strong. At night, I worked tirelessly on my writing projects, trying to save every penny I could. But no matter how I crunched the numbers, it wasn't enough. College tuition, living expenses, books, it all added up to way more than I had or could hope to earn in time. The realization that my dreams of higher education were slipping away hit me hard. I tried to talk to Mom about it once, hoping against hope that she'd have a change of heart. "Mom, I've been looking at college costs, and I don't think I can." She cut me off before I could finish. "Carol, we've been over this. You're on your own now. You'll figure it out." The day of graduation came and went. I should have felt proud, accomplished. Instead, I felt numb. The next morning, Mom appeared in my doorway with a couple of cardboard boxes. "Time to pack up, Carol," she said, her tone eerily cheerful. "Your sister's so excited about her new room." I packed my life into those boxes, fighting back tears. When I was done, Mom helped me carry them to the front door. As I stood on the porch, my meager possessions at my feet, Mom gave me a quick, awkward hug. "Good luck out there," she said, and then the door closed behind her. I stood there for a moment, shell-shocked. Then, taking a deep breath, I picked up my boxes and walked away from the only home I'd ever known. With what little money I had, I managed to rent a tiny studio apartment. It was in a sketchy part of town, and the sound of sirens often kept me up at night, but it was mine. I decided to postpone college for a year. I had no choice, really, and focus on work. I reached out to my contacts at the publishing house, practically begging for more work. To my relief, they were more than happy to oblige. "We've been impressed with your work, Carol," my editor told me. "How would you feel about writing some children's books for us?" I jumped at the opportunity. Soon, I was working around the clock, churning out stories and illustrations. The work was demanding, but I loved it. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was good at something, like I had a purpose. Living alone wasn't easy, but I was used to fending for myself. I learned to budget, to cook simple meals, to navigate the public transit system. I even made a few friends in the building, other young people trying to make it on their own. But despite my best efforts, saving for college remained a distant dream. Every time I thought I was getting ahead, some new expense would crop up. A plumbing emergency in my apartment, a laptop repair, a trip to the doctor when I caught a nasty flu, each setback ate into my savings. It had been a year since I'd left home when my phone rang with a number I never expected to see again. My mother's voice came through, sickly sweet and unfamiliar. "Carol, sweetie, how are you? I've missed you so much. Why don't you come visit us this weekend?" Suspicion immediately flared in my gut, but curiosity got the better of me. I agreed to visit, packing an overnight bag with a mix of anticipation and dread. As soon as I arrived at my old home, my suspicions were confirmed. Mom was overly affectionate, hugging me tightly and peppering me with questions about my life. It felt artificial, like watching a bad actress perform. "Oh, Carol," she cooed, "you must be tired from your trip. Why don't you sleep in your sister's room tonight? She can take the guest room." I nodded, bemused. My sister, now a teenager, rolled her eyes but didn't argue. The next morning, I woke to the sound of familiar voices downstairs. Curious, I made my way to the kitchen, where I froze in the doorway. Sitting at the table were two elderly people I hadn't seen in years, but recognized instantly, my grandparents, my dad's parents. Grandma's eyes lit up when she saw me. "Carol, oh, look how you've grown." I stood there, shocked, as they explained why they were there. "We're moving to a nursing home soon," Grandpa said, his voice gruff with emotion. "But before we go, we wanted to make sure you're doing well. That you're prospering." "Yes," Grandma chimed in, "tell us all about your college. What are you studying, dear?" I opened my mouth, not sure what to say, when Mom jumped in. "Oh, Carol's doing wonderfully at school. Aren't you, honey? Top of her class, just like always." I stared at her, unable to believe the lies flowing so easily from her lips. My grandparents looked pleased, but they still had questions. "That's wonderful," Grandma said. "Could we talk to Carol alone for a bit? We'd love to catch up." A flash of panic crossed Mom's face. "Oh, I don't think that's necessary. Carol's quite busy, aren't you, dear? In fact, we should probably wrap this up soon." She quickly steered the conversation to other topics, barely letting me get a word in. As the visit came to an end, I felt a gentle touch on my arm. Grandma pressed something into my hand, a business card. As soon as my grandparents left, the change in Mom was immediate. Her smile vanished, replaced by a cold, indifferent expression I knew all too well. "Well, that's done," she said, clearing the table briskly. "You should probably head home now, Carol. I'm sure you have things to do." I stood there, the business card burning a hole in my pocket, as Mom all but pushed me out the door. The warmth and affection of moments ago were gone, replaced by the cool detachment I'd grown up with. As soon as I got back to my tiny apartment, I pulled out the business card my grandmother had slipped me. With trembling fingers, I dialed the number, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello?" My grandmother's voice came through, warm and familiar, despite the years. "Grandma, it's Carol," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We talked for a while, her voice filled with a mixture of joy and concern. Before I knew it, we'd arranged for her and Grandpa to visit me the next day. I gave them my apartment address, feeling a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. As soon as I hung up, I threw myself into a cleaning frenzy. My small studio apartment wasn't much, but I was determined to make it as welcoming as possible. I scrubbed every surface, organized my meager belongings, and even managed to find a vase for some fresh flowers I picked up from the corner store. That night, I barely slept. Instead, I spent hours in the tiny kitchenette, preparing lunch for tomorrow. I even decided to bake Grandma's favorite cookies, snickerdoodles, using a recipe I'd found online. Morning came too quickly. I was just pulling the last batch of cookies from the oven when there was a knock at the door. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed down my shirt and went to answer it. There they stood, Grandma and Grandpa. For a moment, we all just stared at each other, years of separation hanging between us. Then Grandma stepped forward, enveloping me in a tight hug. "Oh, Carol," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Look at you, all grown up." As I ushered them inside, I saw their eyes widen as they took in my small apartment. Confusion flickered across their faces. "Carol," Grandpa said slowly, "why are you living here? Your mother told us you were living in the house." Before I could even begin to explain, they launched into a story that turned my world upside down. "We've always wanted to be part of your life," Grandma said, her eyes brimming with tears. "But your mother, she kept us away." They told me about the night my father died, the real story. My mother had been unfaithful. She was already pregnant with my sister when my father found out. He wanted a divorce, but then the accident happened. I sat there, stunned, as they continued. "The house I grew up in, the one Mom and Frank still lived in, was mine. Left to me in my father's will. We've been sending money for your care every month," Grandma said, reaching for my hand. "After you graduated, we increased the amount, thinking you were in college and needed more." The room seemed to spin. All this time, struggling to make ends meet, and there had been money meant for me? A house in my name? "We wanted to make sure you were living comfortably in the house, that everything was okay," Grandpa added. "That's why we came to visit yesterday." As I sat there, staring at my grandparents in disbelief, the weight of their words slowly sank in. I felt a surge of emotions, anger, betrayal, and a deep, aching sadness for the childhood I never had. "I don't understand," I stammered. "All this time, there was money for me? A house in my name?" Grandma squeezed my hand tightly. "Tell us everything, Carol. We need to know what really happened." And so, I did. I told them about my lonely childhood, confined to my room like a dirty secret. I spoke of Frank's hostility, of always feeling like a burden. I explained how the money for college had been taken away, how I'd been kicked out with nothing but a few boxes of belongings. "I've been working nonstop," I said, my voice cracking. "Writing children's books, living in this tiny apartment, trying to save for college. I never knew about any maintenance money." As I spoke, I watched my grandparents' expressions change from shock to fury. Grandpa's face turned red, his hands clenching into fists. "This is unacceptable," he growled. "What your mother has done, it's theft, it's abuse. We're going to make this right, Carol. I promise you that." True to their word, my grandparents sprang into action. They hired a lawyer, one of the best in the city. Over the next few weeks, I watched in awe as they fought tirelessly on my behalf. The court case was brutal. Mom and Frank tried to paint me as a rebellious, ungrateful child who had run away. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements showed years of diverted funds. Neighbors testified about my isolation. In the end, justice prevailed. The judge ruled in our favor, evicting Mom and Frank from the house that was rightfully mine. The back payments of maintenance money were ordered to be paid to me in full. As we left the courthouse, I felt a mix of vindication and sadness. Yes, I had won, but at what cost? The family I had known, dysfunctional as it was gone forever. But I had a new family now. Grandma and Grandpa were determined to make up for lost time. They helped me move into my house, a concept I was still struggling to grasp. They gave me money for tuition and sat with me for hours, helping me choose the right college. I decided on a school close to the nursing home where they were moving. It felt right, being near them after all these years apart. For a while, everything seemed perfect. I visited Grandma and Grandpa often, soaking up their love and wisdom. We'd play cards, watch old movies, and talk for hours. They told me stories about my dad, filling in the blanks of my own history. But life, I was learning, had a cruel way of giving with one hand and taking with the other. Just as I was settling into my new life, reveling in the love of my grandparents, tragedy struck. Grandpa went first. A heart attack, quick and unexpected. Grandma followed barely 2 months later. The doctors said it was natural causes, but I knew the truth, she'd lost her will to live without him. Once again, I found myself alone. The grief was overwhelming. I'd only just found them, only just started to heal the wounds of my past, and now they were gone. I threw myself into my studies, trying to distract myself from the pain. But every empty holiday, every milestone I couldn't share with them, was a fresh wound. Years passed, and life took on a rhythm I never thought possible. I graduated college with honors, landing a job at a prestigious publishing house, the same one that had given me my first break as a teenager. With the inheritance from my grandparents, I bought a cozy apartment close to work, a place that was truly mine. My financial situation had dramatically improved. I rented out my grandparents' house and my childhood home, providing a steady stream of additional income. For the first time in my life, I felt secure, stable, and most importantly, happy. I had friends, a fulfilling career, and a sense of peace I'd never known before. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. One sunny afternoon, my phone rang. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but I recognized it instantly, my mother's. With a mix of curiosity and dread, I answered. "Carol?" Her voice was sickly sweet, dripping with false affection. "Sweetie, how are you?" Before I could respond, she launched into a sob story. My sister was pregnant, abandoned by her husband. They were all living together, Mom, Frank, and my sister, crammed into a tiny rented apartment. "We have nowhere to go," Mom whimpered. "I was hoping, well, that house you own, your childhood home. Could we maybe stay there? Just until we get back on our feet." I listened in stunned silence as she alternated between begging and crying, her voice taking on that manipulative tone I remembered all too well from my childhood. "Please, Carol," she pleaded. "We're family. We need your help." As she spoke, memories flooded back. The lonely nights locked in my room. The years of neglect and emotional abuse. The day she kicked me out with nothing but a few boxes of belongings. Family? I finally spoke, my voice cold. That's rich coming from you, Mom. Where was this family when you locked me away like a dirty secret? Where was it when you kicked me out with nowhere to go? Carol, that's all in the past. No, I cut her off. It's not in the past. It's right here, right now. You're only reaching out because you need something from me. Just like always. I could almost hear her scrambling, trying to find the right words to manipulate me. But I wasn't that scared, lonely girl anymore. You want my advice, Mom? Solve your own problems. Figure it out on your own. Isn't that what you told me when you threw me out? But Carol. Good luck, I said, echoing her words from years ago. You're going to need it. Without waiting for a response, I hung up. My hand shook as I blocked her number, but I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For years, I'd carried the burden of her rejection, her neglect. But now, I was finally free.